Hi, everyone. We are here today to celebrate the publication of Hebe's Lament and Other Stories by Gay Lynch. How are you feeling, Gay?
Fine, good, thank you.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's always good to see your face. Should do it once a month as an antidote.
That's a lot of work for you to put out that many books.
I know.
So I have some questions for you, but first of all, I'm going to read out your biography and then we will begin. Gay Lynch writes hybrid essays, novels, and stories on unceded Bunurong land as an independent researcher adjunct to Flinders University. Deep commitment to and engagement with place, history, and marginalised voices drives her. Gay's previous books include Clean Skin, Unsettled, and Hum Num, the latter of which was published by Hembury Books earlier in the year. So, Gay, congratulations. This is your first collection of short stories.
Thank you.
How long has the book been in the making?
Well, not so long because I think I came quite late to writing stories. I began ambitiously with novels. But I was using stories all the time to teach creative writing in schools and then in university. So I knew the form, but I hadn't really tried it. But when I began to teach the 2-hour workshops at university and realize how much could go on in the story and how easily you could deal with it in 2 hours, I started to practice and learn from the students. And I taught a topic on surveyed famous short story writers, mostly American, but actually quite a good mix. I've got a little list: Chekhov, Gogol, Hoffman, Joyce, Nam Lee, who I heard on Saturday night, Catherine Mansfield, Ama Atu, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and William Trevor. So they were all people I had read, but not always their stories. Stories are very hard to write, much harder than I imagined when I read them. And in worst case scenarios, in mine and occasionally others, nothing seems to happen or way too much.
Nothing seems to happen or way too much. That's fun.
So it's quite a precise art. But before long, as I say in my introduction, I think that stories crept up and dazzled me, and I became interested in knowing the form, and I began to write them alongside my essays and novels, and began to enjoy them. But the short answer about why this collection came into being is because I wanted to gather them together for myself, but also because most of them are behind paywalls.
Yeah.
And it will be a way of sharing them and for other people to read them. And it's interesting for me to do the work that you've set me to think about the subjects and themes and what my preoccupations are and that kind of thing.
Now, the collection's lead story, Hebe's Lament, won the 2024 American Association of Australasian Literary Studies Prize for Creative Prose. Can you please tell us about this story?
So the opening story it distills some of my complicated thinking about the Australian March the 4th march gathering that happened all over Australia over the alleged rape and violence inside our Parliament houses. Hebe is a surgeon who's clocked off an operating list to attend. I thought maybe I'll just read a little passage if that's okay, to get us in the zone. She edges around the margins of the crowd to stand beneath a Canary Island palm, tries to call Addie again, no reception. Overhead, a helicopter clatters. Today feels like a war, and it bloody well is. Since 2008, intimate partners have killed over 1,000 women, and today we're looking for another. More, nothing short of war will force men to relinquish power they pretend doesn't exist. Yet Hebe doesn't see herself fighting on any front line, apart from operating through the pandemic, and what her partner said, she is not all that courageous. Lie after lie in the highest house, told not only by men but by their Valkyrie-like henchwomen, makes her want to call every injustice, but she feels pessimistic. No one relinquishes power. Hebe would not ordinarily have rostered herself off a surgical list. Today, thousands of women burn with imperative. Yesterday, someone had invited their father knows best Prime Minister to be keynote speaker at National Women's Conference. What the actual fuck? So that gives you a little taste of her consciousness. But I worked for decades, as you know, with Indigenous people, Ngarrindjeri people, and I learned a lot from them about that confronted my kind of zero tolerance attitude on some things. You know, why can't men take care of each other? Why can't they do the important work with young men? Why don't we have a curfew for men? They say, and I've heard many since, if we leave the men behind, we have no people. So I learned that from them and other people, and I'm speaking to you on unceded Boonwurrung land as a part of the Kulin Nation, and so I pay my respects to them as custodians of that land. But I'll read you another little extract. I know there's some terrible subjects incorporated in the story, but it's also supposed to be a bit funny. Hebe's partner challenges her connections, her ideas about care and connection. So, on the way out of the bookshop, which many people will recognise as Pellegrini's, her partner raises his paper bag to her and calls out, "Bon courage!" "Lazy shit," she despairs. "Your decision not to come with me is morally indefensible." As he turns up the slope, a breeze eddies and flips his burgundy scarf over his shoulder. She wants to go home with him, to enclose and clamp him on the living room floor if necessary. So there's always that double thinking, dialogical, I suppose, where you can see all points of view, but some of them aren't sustainable and some of them are damaging for other people. So the Hebe story does incorporate homelessness, violence, suicide, rage, and compassion. Conventionally, literary fiction short stories are open-ended. And so the reader must do the work for themselves, thinking about what happened. So hence my dedication at the front of Hebe to strong women and gentle young men everywhere.
Yeah. No, you don't give everything to intelligence stories. Don't do that, do they? Tie everything up with a bow at the end.
Well, I don't know. No. Short answer is no. But no, I suppose I've just finished a novel like that, which tied all the things up in a bow. And I guess some people are doing different things, but I think in the kind of fiction which I write and many people write, it's I think someone says the stories that are most successful stay with you, and people talk about them and have different ideas about what happened.
Yeah, you give something to the reader. The reader's more active participant through their own interpretation.
Yeah.
Part of winning the prize was that you then became a judge for the creative prose first prize at the American Association of Australasian Literary Studies. What was it like judging that? Like, what was involved?
Well, I knew I would love the reading, of course, but it was a prose prize, so there were quite a few essays as well as stories. And there's a kind of ethical secrecy around the judging. So even blind, the writers have to remain hidden. Some writer judges I know well have said that they recognise certain styles and preoccupations when they judge things, but thank God it didn't happen like that for me. I didn't recognise anyone. And every reader is a text. So I brought my literary values to the judging, where I was looking for craft, complexity, a degree of difficulty, someone who put themselves through a challenge, and the love of language, either playful or whatever. So the second judge was based in Hawaii, and we Zoomed together, and the stories that stayed in our heads for days couldn't be overlooked. So we also had to think about people's rights to write about certain things without knowing who they were. And so we reduced our list to 10, and then we talked again, then we reduced our list to 4. Then we each reread stories that may not have appeared on each other's list to give them careful consideration, and we talked about them. But mainly we landed on the same page. Mainly we agreed, and then we deepened our discussion to find a winner.
And when will the winner be announced?
I'm not sure. I think it's been delayed a little bit, but it should
Okay.
be soon. Yeah.
Amazing. That's an honor. Can you tell us about some of the themes in your collection of short stories?
So there are a lot of subjects in my stories, and I suppose the themes would be my take on the subjects, or there might be like a nest of ambiguities that I want to interrogate. So there's some minor subjects will appear like devolving dog species. Is it fair to buy a pug knowing they're being bred to not be able to breathe? They're very cute, but is this fair on them? Or the power, excuse me, the power disparities between art producers and salespeople, for instance. There's some of these things will crop up in some of the stories, and some of it is a bit metafictive. But I riff on a lot of different things and I speculate, but for one example, The Valley of Death is a story about a Japanese proposal to build an aged care complex on the site of a rundown resort on the Fleurieu Peninsula where I then lived. At the same time, friends were bringing non-English speaking wives of, well, they spoke a little English, wives of Japanese timber executives to have afternoon tea on my veranda. And I deeply admired the women's grace and intelligence. So a lot of people were against the plan for the complex for all sorts of reasons, but it set me thinking about the future availability of work on the peninsula, apart from food trails and tourism, and the complex's impact on the environment and on Adelaide's burgeoning military industry. It was quite a big project, a submarine project, and others at the time. So Juno is a care worker looking for a care package, and to her geese, she is a goddess. Frequently, you'll find Greek allusions or classical stories coming in. Ever since she injured herself saving a Japanese resident from the cliff tops, she's been laid off from her aged care work. It spoils her sex life. It makes her angry with Jupe, her French chef boyfriend, lover, and suspicious of mysterious Eshima, who comes to service her hardware. So I'll read a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Her injury must have finally unhinged her. Wearing rage and her goatskin coat, Juno paused on the cliff top, her jaw jutting to the left, making control impossible. 4 of her geese snickered behind her. Down the track to the village she marched, ablaze with negative ions, carrying her umbrella aloft like a spear, because Jupe had let her down again, and because management refused to accept her work cover claim. Not only had they withheld an off-the-record settlement, but they were acting illegally. All her life she had felt equal, functional, an intelligent being performing one of the few essential jobs that couldn't be completely mechanized. Off duty or not, she had saved a villager from certain death, and they couldn't conjure up a fucking care package for a carer. For 2 weeks, she couldn't turn her head, even after enduring the mumbo-jumbo of maverick chiros in their antiquated ultrasound machines, their gel pads swirling across her shoulders. Had she expected gratitude, flowers, or chocolates? Not a bloody bluebell. On good days, she begged for pain relief. On bad days, she threatened Duke with deportation. What did management say? She asked him after the rescue. They said, what a woman. He folded his arms. So bloody clever. Saved us from compo ruin. See about reciprocal package. His eyes fixed on hers. She almost fell for it. Then drew herself up. They didn't say that, did they? He shrugged. Sure, they want to. Hamstrung by post-capitalist ethos. Ethos. Do you even know what that means? I should report you. Salavi, no point. My country, New Caledonia, is underwater. So I didn't mention, but it's set slightly in the future. Yeah, so that's probably just one example.
It's a lot of.
I know you've got lots of questions.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to hear it. In what ways is your book a feminist body of work?
Well, if I tell you the original title was Penis Envy, you might think so.
I so wish we'd done that.
I know you wanted to, didn't you? Did I mention? I think I mentioned it to you.
Yes, I was keen. But
Yeah.
I love Hebe's Lament.
Yeah. Anyway, so you could be forgiven for thinking, but I'm not sure. You might know is if the word feminist even appears in the stories. but that's true that they have a feminist bent in the sense that they address the human rights to equality and opportunity. And it's clear that many men in the stories benefit from intergenerational privilege. But I am very interested in emerging masculinities. I have boys and young men in my life that I love, and I think they're an important part of the solution.
Mm.
So hence my dedication, which I think I mentioned before. Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so in my stories, girls and women act, as should happen in any story. Protagonists should act.
Mm-hmm.
And so in situations where men won't relinquish power, my stories can go every which way. I'll refer now to one story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, which grew from my living in a South Australian frontier town quite north. And my protagonist befriends a newcomer, a survivor of domestic coercion, control, and violence, although she's in process. She hasn't. Well, anyway, whilst I hadn't planned to write a fairy tale, the twist is ultimately devastating. I borrowed the title from a violent Flannery O'Connor story, which I reverse. And in my story, a woman takes up her gun. In another one, Tread Softly by the River, was incubated during the Mildura Writers' Festival. After a convener of a contingent of writers, mainly poets, challenged us to create something while we were there to share. So Edwina's job is redescribed while she's on sick leave. After she reapplies for her upgraded position, she finds herself unemployed and shortly after homeless. Using her friend's voucher to attend Mildura Writers' Festival becomes Edwina's swan song. The story is bleak and reflects my concern for the growing number of women becoming homeless. We're living in different times now. I have little footnotes everywhere that I won't speak about, which we all know. But when the US had hard-won women's rights rescinded, especially in relation to women's bodies and reproductive rights, the repercussions are being felt globally.
Yeah, it's terrible and will be felt for generations.
I fear, but
yeah,
who knows? So you'll find all the publications in the back of Hebe, and they're common ones. A lot of writers publish in the literary journals of Australia, but Antipodes, where Hebe, the lead stories published, Best Australian Stories, Griffith Review, Island Meanjin, Midnight Sun have commissioned a few terrific anthologies. Pratik is an overseas one. Tan is an Irish one, which I say to the editor, she's trying to keep me green. Verity La, which is just back online now after a break, and Westerly. And also there's some other anthologies by Glimmer Press, for instance.
Amazing. What would your advice be? Because it's fantastic to have all your stories back as one for people to easily be able to read them, as you said. What would your advice be for other essayists who would love to do something like this in terms of how you went about putting them together and getting permission or whatever you needed to do?
Well, to be honest, I never thought about putting them together until I became more deeply involved in this short story community, really, as a beginner in a way. So I think everybody comes to this from a different position. I hadn't thought of collecting because I was just happy to publish odd ones in various places and think, oh, I'll keep trying. But if you've published stories already, you might consider linking them in some way, or you might just try and get together maybe 8 or 6 and have some sketches or plans for some others. That would be a good way to pitch. It depends where you are. If you were just learning like me, you might join a workshop at one of your state writers' centres. And a lot of people enter online comps, but you need a budget line, for an annual budget line, because they add up. They're quite expensive. And if you enter more than one story in a comp, that's quite a lot of money. You might attend the Australian Short Story Festival, which is held every year, alternating between Perth and Adelaide. You could pitch to the journals. Island and Meanjin, for instance, they also publish stories in between the print issues on their webpage. So that will make your story more accessible. You'll get some feedback, you get some editing, and decent publishers pay well. Meanjin, I'm not sure what the price is now. It's probably the Australian Society of Authors ASA rates, but they were paying $900 for a piece or an essay or a story, which is pretty good money.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for all sorts of reasons, obviously, people who are interested, if they need to write for all sorts of reasons apart from money, to witness, to entertain, to save family stories which will otherwise be lost, and to work through vicarious and actual trauma. It's important for some people to understand their thinking and work out what they're going to do. But on the negative side, which I should share that with you, but there aren't a lot of short stories being published, collections being published in Australia, but recently Fiona McFarlane's Highway 1, I think it won the New South Wales Fiction Prize, which is pretty good to bump off all the novels. And people do say that if we're looking for a book to read, that it's very strong in craft, that the stories are beautifully crafted. And there are other collections that are successful, Miranda Rio, Laura Jean Mackay, quite a few people. But on the whole, an agent told me that publishers don't want stories, nor do they want essays or novellas, all the things I happened to be writing at the time. Another said, fiction's very unpopular now, why don't you turn it into non-fiction? I'm like,
you can't turn fiction into non-fiction. You can do it.
Yeah, you can. Well, you could make it like some kind of essay, metafictively looking at your process, or some research could be embedded. But anyway, so I'm very happy and professional. Hembury's industry now. It works for me. I'll put it in the present tense. And each of my Hebe stories had already been through a few gatekeepers. So I'm really happy to see that you've enabled them to be available.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk about some of the protagonists. An art academic rescues a beautiful boy, an accountant abandons her dementing father, a coroner risks her reproductive rights, a DFAT careerist falls for a commitment phobe, a dirt farmer cares for his disabled child, and a vet student loses her dog at a Celtic festival. Where do you find inspiration for this, Gay?
Well, I guess everywhere. Most of my life, every 2 or 3 years, I uprooted and moved with my family, city and country places. And from the age of 14, I travelled, and I liked it, and I still like it. I hate feeling stuck. I like new people, especially ones in books. So, but the fictional settings are sometimes contemporary, sometimes historical, and sometimes set in the future. But they're in places where I might have lived, or sometimes they're in places where I've spent a short time, but being deeply enculturated by what's around me. Not to say that the natives couldn't write better, but so northern Melbourne, where I currently live, is in 6 stories. Northern South Australia, where I lived as a child and an adult, appear in several. There's stories set in Apollo Bay, Budapest, Carburg, Shanghai, and Woodford Island, which sprang from research trips and travel to visit family. So I picked out 3 or 4, 2 or 3, but you have to be the timekeeper because I have no idea where we are.
We have time.
Okay, I'll do a few. So the call out, mostly I respond to call outs. Quite often I respond to call outs and I think, have I got time to write something that fits the call out? Because sometimes they're themed. Or have I got something that could be adapted, or have I got something perfect for that? So the call out for Angel's Brolly came from Text, which is a journal for the Australian Association of Writing Programs, the university programs of creative writing. And I wanted to satirise the neoliberal university management and the student interest in fantasy genre and schlock. And I'd marked a lot of Game of Thrones stories. I watched it while I did the ironing just so that I knew where I recognised things. And I had a bit of fun with this story. Angel carries an umbrella. Obviously, it's speculative fiction, and there's nothing more speculative than an umbrella. So I'll read you a little bit.
Okay.
And it's as I say, I may not have mentioned, but I do love free indirect style where the protagonist's register or way of speaking and background creeps into the main narrative, and a bit of mine as well. So this is really excessive. It might be too much for you, who knows. The sky morphed from generic blue to bruisey black as Angel, ochre-faced, a cloak of charcoal smudged hair rippling behind her, fled her father's death head along a corrugated track that led to Bespoke University. Tumbling, screaming, crying, collapsing twice at least upon the grassy verges, weighed down by adverbs, adjectives, and the definite article, seduced by cliches and rhetorical questions, exhausted by repetitions. Angel's body felt faint from continuous exertion. I felt faint from marking some of these. For 3 days she ran on, stabbing Speck's beak into the limestone path ahead. This he allowed, this small autonomy. Dark, svelte, masterful Speck. Nothing could be more explicitly speculative than a black umbrella. Angel fingered his beady weather eye as she strode along. Over and over, a disconcerting image swamped her thoughts of her white-faced father, gargling, gurgling, drowning in his own blood. An image that featured Speck hovering over him, clawing at his throat. What drove her through forest after generic forest in which giant trees cast weird shadows? What compelled her periodically to rest her hand against her hard belly? Education drew her, led her, trick or trope. So I had a lot of fun with that. I don't know if anyone else would have fun with it.
It is prose as tautly wound as a good pearl choker, Gay.
Say again.
It is prose as tautly wound as a good pearl choker.
Well, I sometimes wanted to say to the students as these girls were stumbling through the forest, get up, stop, think. But it's a genre, and some people are extremely good at it, and I'm interested in their cleverness, and so I was having a bit of fun with it myself. But I don't think I could live in the forest. No. Although I was raised on Rosemary Sutcliffe, so I probably could. Well, so here's another one with Icarus Bot. I had answered a Griffith Review call out for stories about sport. And I knew that Griffith Review, when they theme those anthologies, they might have, I don't know, three pieces of fiction and a couple of poems, and mostly their articles on the subject.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So this one, a rural football recruit, first corrupted by his father, falls again from grace in the rarefied and ruthless world of big business AFL. Addictions and violence come next. I borrowed a grim story my Australian cricketer boyfriend had told me about a training program. Players ran from the sea to mount a line of girls lying on the beach. I gave Icarus a girlfriend named Crystal who might just represent meth or an online algorithm picking up key words. Are you depressed? To suggest he's in trouble. I blur reality. Like some wags, this is an acronym I only learned since I came to Melbourne. What is it? Wives and girlfriends.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. Crystal flits when the AFL drop him. So here's a little bit. This is Crystal. To this day, I don't remember the sequence of events too well. A streetlight flickered, offering a strobe effect, invited rhythm. In my mind's eye, I saw a shimmering aura, then the outline of Crystal's small, pale face tapering sweetly to her pointed chin, her sad grey eyes and her lashes glittering with water, drops or sand. Drifts of matted blonde hair hung either side of her knitted hat. Through a thin screen, crazed like a sheet of shattered ice, I noticed her lips fading to blue. Despite the chill, I blew before I got inside her. Was it really Crystal? So it's a sad story, really. It's probably a cautionary tale. No, I don't know.
Do you want to read a third one?
Want me to?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got. Should I choose that one? So the abduction of Ganymede, that came from a call out for stories on beauty. After Midnight Sun decided to publish this anthology, and then Black Ink republished it in Best Australian Stories.
Amazing.
But some people thought it was a bit cool, and it was meant to be. So while I was at a conference in Perth, I had probably saved a 14-year-old boy from a beating on the Perth train to Freo. I just played dumb tourist, and I talked and talked. The train was going at speed. I couldn't really get out my phone in front of the perpetrator and so on. So after they got off the train, I also followed them to make sure he was safe. But I'd been reading Germaine Greer's book, The Boy, in which her enthusiasm for the young male form, often sculptures and artifacts, but other things as well, shocked some readers. She said things like, boy's sperm runs like tap water, or running like tap water. And so I made my protagonist an art academic who also saves a boy on a train and guides him away from his assailants. And you never know his name because, and that is probably the coolness because I write it in second person you.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if she's not like me and the beautiful boy is not safe at all? And so I'm trying to think, the editor of the Best Australian, she thought like me that the boy was in danger. So I'll just read a little bit about the way she refers to the boy. You gasp at his face, at the piece of red leather tied around his hairless neck, at the tatty lace scarf veering to one side during the collision, at his beauty. His full lips tremble, his eyes dart across your face in a way as if in terror of a commuter in a silk shirt calling a transit guard or the police. Panic travels across his soft, childish face. You want to press your thumb against the cleft in his tilted chin, like the god who placed it there. So, again, the Greek stories will give another layer to this story. Dark birds fly against the wind against the way the direction of the train, which I have actually seen is amazing. Not in that in that instance, but if you see a bird flying backwards, it's quite odd. It sort of adds to the oddness, but in fact, they're probably being buffeted by the wind.
Yeah, perhaps.
They're
But
flapping.
trains are a sort of sub theme in some of the stories, aren't they?
They are. So while some of the stories are rural stories, I also, now that I live in Melbourne, I also want to understand and experience some things adjacent to my own.
Mm.
And so I in 4 or 5 stories, conflict plays out on trains.
Mm.
And I when I arrived, I delighted in the efficiency of trains and trams and their capacity for space and sociability. But even before COVID, I noticed the frisson of fear that some passengers prompt when they enter carriages.
Yeah.
And twice I witnessed assaults and once a suicide.
Oh, gee.
So,
Ghastly. Yeah.
so we'll skip that other story.
Pardon me.
Oh no, just all right. Just go ahead. What's your next question?
Well, I was going to ask about how you approach writing them. You mentioned at the beginning that, yes, they can be more difficult than a novel. And I think that is true because you have such an economy of words and time and to quickly build up characters that will move someone. So how do you approach writing a short story?
So I think the architecture of a novel means that if you get it wrong, it's quite hard to fix it. It's a much bigger time investment. So I think stories are tricky, but the suffering is finite, if you like. But so I pretty naturally, if I sit in front of a screen or I have paper and pencil, I tend to spew out 3,000 or 4,000 words quite easily. I have too many words in my head.
Yeah. You're not sure of words or ideas.
No, but they won't be all good words, you see. So in this, I am both lucky and unlucky that I always need to cut a lot, like Michelangelo looking for the David in a piece of rock. You know, I have to, it flows out, but then I have to fix it. So in Australia, most of the call-outs for about 3,000 words for a story, but in the United States, they're more like 10,000 words. So that's possibly a good transition if you've been writing novels to write to the American market, but it is quite challenging to get in because they have huge creative writing programs that we all know about. Yeah, so here's some little pithy advice. Feel subversive because no one can stop you writing on any subject, and then later you can edit. I always need a name for my protagonist before I can write a word. It's really important. And so the baby's book of names is my friend. And sometimes I look for thematic names or names that are national. I don't care that much about what the protagonist looks like, only how they act and think. And recently there was a lovely post on Substack by an Irish writer, I think it's pronounced Nisha Dolan, who talks about cognitive realism. I always knew I was writing realism, but I like the idea of cognitive realism, where in creative writing schools, sometimes there was a swing the other way, where we got to feel every sensation of the body. Everything was somatic, including, you know, how they digested breakfast. And I think this is a swing back the other way, and everyone has to find their place in that continuum. But I really like the idea of cognitive realism. So people will have to decide for themselves. Mostly I know settings well, or I walk them, or I draw rough maps. I need the maps because as soon as my protags get on their feet, which is pretty soon, they have to know where they're going. I try to make the first paragraph lean into the story so that within a paragraph, you know where it is, what time it is, who this is, what's the looming problem, or, you know, what is the question, and the mood. The mood is so important. The authorial voice carries the mood and how you feel about the story when you begin and as you go on. I might have a personal preference for stories that make me cry, laugh at the same time, and I love black humor. So I don't know. Partly it's to do with that I like a lot of dialogue because I collect dialogue everywhere. I just love when people say things that are funny or profound or simple or original. So I tend to collect that, and sometimes it just turns up here and there when I, you know, in the middle of a story and I want someone to speak or it fits the character. And so equity for everyone, I think, in stories, but I like surprises.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, my best friend's father would greet me at the door and say, "Why's here?" Like WHY question mark. That's what his nickname was for me. Because
Why?
yeah, why? Anything people ask, why? Because I like to hold two ideas in my head at the same time, which is probably not the best advice you'll hear from really excellent short story writers, is just have one thing going on. I think Kate Kennedy says one clean swoop. And I do mainly have one thing going on, but there's just sometimes two things get entwined along the way through. So it's a puzzle to make them work. And when you're writing, sometimes you won't have time for journaling or diary writing. That might be something just do on holidays, but I cut and paste off my social media posts a bit, and then I think, oh, I'll go back and I'll expand that story, but I probably won't. My other big thing is I hate cliches, and so really cliches are just worn out metaphors, and some of the ones I don't like are closure, journey, volcanic orgasms, all that kind of stuff that just sort of tips into satire sometimes.
Yeah, it makes me feel tired to hear it.
A volcanic orgasm makes you tired, yes.
Oh, the others.
No, I'm teasing. Yeah, well, usually, I mean, the earth moving and all that. It's so hard to put that in words that are original.
Yeah.
Anyway, because everyone's doing it, I suppose. So metaphors just mean connecting two unlike things together, and so make up your own is good. And sometimes I just tell myself I'm just a craftsperson, I'm just a tradie, and I can do that. It's like an exercise you might set for a class where you ask them to, you give them 3 words and say make a story out of it. But I was coming back from my physio the other day, and in the middle of Chapel Street there was a man with braces and tight black pants tucked in high black boots and no t-shirt, bald, completely bald, beating the heck out of a wheelie bin. For a long time I had to stop and wait for him to move over a bit. And so when I got home, I was working on this project for Kill Your Darlings, a metaphor project, where we were all told to submit something that had been edited out of our work, our darlings, Kill Your Darlings. That's what their title was based on. And then they scrambled them up and issued them to people. So they gave me a cue that said, a Berlin, what was it? A man singing in a Berlin car park. And so I put that man straight into the Berlin car park. And it turned out he was my protagonist's brother. And what had got up his nose this time, I don't know. But I only had 300 words, so readers will have to work it out for themselves.
What fun. That's such a great creative exercise.
And it's so 300 words, so no one does. You could like, I can do 300 words. That would be fun. And maybe nothing. It may come to nothing.
Not a great investment of time has been spent. So you just do
but
it.
The whole project is so interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because they'll publish it eventually as a collection of responses to other people's deletions. And there they are doing good, the deletions in a different way.
That is so cool. I love that. I love that.
Project, yeah.
Final question for you, Gay, is could you tell us about your upcoming trip to Killarney in Ireland?
So the main reason I'm going now, or then, is to attend the ICSSE, the International Conference of Short Stories in English, which is held every 2 years and run by a board, which includes Australians, and headed by Professor Morris A. Lee from the Central Arkansas University. And he is a brilliant Afro-American man who spends hundreds of hours of work to bring all the strands together, and attendees from all around the world who write stories in English or critique them. Yeah. So having researched and written Unsettled, an Irish novel, I've got links with the West Side of Ireland, Books and People. Mm-hmm. AI tells me that, so my son-in-law tells me, AI says I have Irish descent. And my family came from Galway, which isn't true, but I'm sure they'll hoover up some better information soon. In fact, I'm not descended from the Irish, but the Scots. Anyway, I wrote Unsettled for my kids who descend through their father. So I do love Ireland, and I'm excited about this visit because Rebecca Clarkson will launch Hebe. Many people I know, not many people I know, speak as well as her about the short story craft. Yeah. They are her passion. And not only is she a doyen of stories in the Adelaide Hills, but she's a member of the ICSSE board. So we're both excited about going to do that. The theme this year, the conference theme, is investigating the form. So not in a negative sense that it's not like a novel, but what are the things that only a short story can do so well? And so there'll be lots of people presenting papers and reading their work. Everyone will read their work, and a lot of people will have their work published in an anthology to accompany the conference. And so it's the kind of conference where people who listen to your podcast might be interested, because it's a very inclusive conference. People come in families. Sometimes a son will read or a daughter will read, and their parent as well, and they come all the time. I'm late to this. I missed Vienna and I missed Shanghai, although I had a daughter in Shanghai for a while, so I do know Shanghai, and one of my stories in Hebe is set in Shanghai. But I caught up eventually in 2018. I went to the Lisbon conference and gave a paper, read a story, and did a workshop. And I think if you could see a way to go, most people who are interested in short story form would love these conferences. To meet that range of people and to know wherever you are on that spectrum, you're very welcome and will be warmly included.
How wonderful. What are the dates of it?
Well, I think it goes for 5 days. I'm just thinking because I land a bit before that, before the conference, because my husband's doing a bridge tournament. But I think maybe it's the 15th to the 18th or 19th. The last day, the Saturday, is a lot of Irish writers are reading, and this is the other thing this conference does well, that they rely a lot, or they foreground the host country's writers. And of course, I've read lots of Irish writers, especially 19th century, and that will be a wonderful day.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's going to be a career highlight.
It might be, yeah.
Yeah. Just amazing. Well, congratulations, Gay, on the publication of Hebe's Lament and Other Stories.
Thank you, Jess.